I never meant for him to see me like that, not in that moment. I wasn't even sure why I brought the dress with me. It wasn't mine. It wasn't meant for me. But the mirror was kind, and for a fleeting second, I let myself pretend. My sister had asked me to stay at her place while she and her husband spent the long weekend in Vermont. She said it with that casual tone of voice she uses when she doesn't want to sound like she's asking for help. Just check the mail, water the plants. You'll have the place to yourself. The truth? I welcomed the escape. My house had become too quiet and too loud in the ways that only long marriages can become. Charles and I weren't fighting anymore because we had run out of things to say. We spoke like strangers with paperwork between them. Even our silences had grown stale. So I took the opportunity. Her home was always brighter than mine, both in lighting and in mood. Something about the way she arranged her books by color, or the little ceramic bowls by the sink filled with sea glass. You couldn't stay there without feeling like maybe, just maybe, you were someone different. The dress was in her closet, behind a row of beige cardigans and wine-colored coats. It stood out, even unlit. Deep green silk. Slinky in a way that defied modesty and clearly expensive. She'd mentioned it before, I think some gala or anniversary party she never ended up attending. I wasn't snooping. I was just looking, and then I touched it. Then I held it up to the light. And then I was wearing it. I remember the exact moment I turned toward the mirror. The sun was spilling through the gauze curtains, softening everything. I saw my own reflection, not as I was, but as I remembered being once. Shoulders back, waist still familiar, something in my eyes awake. I didn't feel younger. I just felt possible. And then the door opened. He stood there, Michael. My sister's neighbor. Mid-50s, maybe a few years older than me. Tall, in that weary but well-kept way. Always mowing his lawn with quiet concentration, always waving politely from his porch. His divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. My sister had filled me in during one of her long, wine-fueled phone calls. We both froze. The silence was immediate and charged, like the air before a summer storm. He looked at me, not with shock or discomfort, but with something else. Something still. As if he'd walked into a memory he hadn't meant to summon. "Oh," he said, and then quickly, "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was here." The back gate was open, and I thought. I grabbed the robe hanging by the bedpost and pulled it around me. My hands fumbled. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He looked away, stepping backward through the doorway. Sorry again," he said, retreating like a man who knew better than to linger. The door clicked shut. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart thudding. It wasn't shame I felt, exactly. It was something quieter and harder to explain. Like someone had noticed something in me I'd forgotten was there. Like someone had witnessed a moment I hadn't even fully understood myself. That night, I poured myself a glass of my sister's wine and sat out on her back porch. The breeze carried the scent of lavender from the garden. The stars above were half muted by clouds. I was beginning to think the whole thing had been a kind of dream when I saw the flicker of light next door. Michael stepped out onto his patio. He had a book in one hand, a glass in the other. He didn't look over right away. I think he was deciding whether he should. And then he did. "Nice evening," he said. I replied, wrapping the robe tighter around me. "You always read outside?" "Helps me think," he said. "Helps me forget, too." I nodded. We fell into a kind of comfortable quiet. Not speaking, not leaving. "I hope I didn't embarrass you earlier," he said, carefully. "It wasn't my intention." "No," I said, too quickly. Then softer, "It was just unexpected." He smiled faintly. "You looked happy in the dress." I didn't answer. My throat caught around the thought. "I remember that dress," he added. "Your sister wore it once, years ago. Some fundraiser thing. She's good at looking like she belongs in things," I said. "Events, conversations, photographs." He took a sip of his drink. "So are you." I looked away then. Not because I didn't believe him, but because I did. Because something in me had already started to shift, quietly and without permission. And I knew this weekend would be different. I just didn't know how yet. I woke to the sound of birds. Not the harsh kind that scold the morning into being, but gentle, persistent, like someone humming a song they didn't realize they remembered. The air was lighter in my sister's house. The curtains moved in rhythm with the breeze, and the sun touched the walls as if it had been invited. For a moment, I didn't feel like me. But memory is stubborn. The image of Michael in the doorway wouldn't leave. Not the moment itself, not even the awkwardness. It was the expression. Not hunger, not curiosity, something deeper. He had seen something in me I had forgotten was still visible. I spent the morning trying to fold myself back into ordinary things. Coffee, dishes, a crossword puzzle I didn't finish. But everything around me felt like it was listening. The silence had an ear pressed to the wall. Around noon, I stepped into the backyard. The grass had grown a little since my sister left. I bent down and ran my hand through it, the kind of thing you do without thinking, just to remind yourself you're real. And then I heard the gate creak open. Michael. He wasn't holding anything. Not a tool, not an excuse. Just himself. I owe you an apology, he said. I straightened up. You already gave one. I know, but I've been thinking about it. It wasn't the walking in that was an accident. It's the way I looked at you. I held his gaze. How did you look at me? He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect. Like someone I used to know. Like someone I might still want to know. That should have made me uneasy, but it didn't. It made me ache. I think I said slowly, you saw something I wasn't expecting to show. He nodded. I think maybe you needed someone to see it. We ended up walking. Not far, just down the block and back. The kind of meandering stroll that feels like a question with no answer. He told me about his daughter, living in Portland, studying marine biology, sends photos of whales with handwritten captions. I told him about the garden I used to keep, the way Charles stopped asking about it when the blooms began to wilt. We didn't mention the dress again. Not directly, but the weight of it hung between us. That evening, I made dinner. Nothing elaborate, just pasta, salad, wine. I wasn't expecting company, but as twilight settled and the first cicadas began their slow hum, there was a knock at the door. Michael stood there, holding 2 bowls of strawberries and cream. For dessert, he said. Figured I'd return the awkward favor with a sweet one. I laughed, genuinely. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from my own throat in longer than I wanted to admit. We ate in the living room. No music, just the sounds of night pressing against the windows. He told me about his ex-wife, carefully, as if handling something fragile. I listened. I told him about Charles, but only in pieces. The way a person might describe a house they used to live in. He didn't interrupt. He just heard me. The next day, I found myself waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. A knock? A message? Another accident of proximity? But nothing came. By afternoon, I was restless. So I went into town, bought groceries I didn't need, walked through the bookstore without reading a single title. When I returned, there was a note under the doormat. Evening walk? Around 7 a.m. It was the dash that undid me, that little pause before his initial. A space where uncertainty might live. At 7, I met him by the fence. We walked again. Slower this time. Through the park, past a pond, beneath branches that caught the moonlight like secrets. We didn't talk much. But then he stopped. Turned to me. You ever think about who you used to be? He asked. All the time. And who you still could be? That question lingered like smoke. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. And in that look, I think we both found something we hadn't named yet. We stood like that for a long time. Not touching. Not leaning. Just being. Together. In that space where no decision had been made yet. Where everything still hovered on the edge. I should go, I whispered. I know, he said. But he didn't move. Neither did I. Eventually, I turned away. step by step, my heart loud in my chest, not because anything had happened, but because it almost had. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my sister's bed, surrounded by the scent of her lavender oil and neat linens. But all I could feel was the ache of something just out of reach. I thought about the way Michael listened, how present he was in silence, how he listened not just with his ears, but with his entire presence. How no part of him rushed. I thought about the dress, still hanging in the closet, still waiting, like a question unanswered. In the morning, I stood in front of the mirror again, this time in my own clothes, hair tied back, no silk, no pretense. And still, I saw it, that flicker, that woman, the one he saw. Later that day, my sister called, said they were coming home early, rain in Vermont, plans cut short, which meant I had one night left, one more chance to decide what any of this meant. I thought about knocking on his door. I thought about letting it fade. And I thought about the space between those two things, the space where a choice becomes a turning point. I opened the closet, touched the fabric, and waited for night to fall. They returned the next morning. My sister and her husband, voices echoing through the hallway, bags dropping by the door, a laugh too loud for the early hour. I heard her calling my name from the kitchen, the kettle already whistling, and I stood there frozen, one hand still on the closet door. The dress hung quietly in the corner, untouched since the night before. I didn't wear it again. Not because I was ashamed, but because it had served its purpose. We sat on the porch sipping lukewarm tea, my sister telling stories about the fog in Vermont and the antique shop she fell in love with. I smiled, nodded, made all the right sounds. But inside, I was elsewhere. I hadn't told her about Michael. Not because I couldn't, but because it wasn't something I wanted to explain, not in facts, not in bullet points. Some moments are like bruises you press gently, not to hurt, but to remember. Later that day, I saw him again. Not directly. Through the blinds, across the yard. He was trimming the hedge, slow and deliberate. He didn't look up. I almost stepped out, almost waved, but didn't. Instead, I packed my things. One small suitcase. One goodbye note folded carefully beside the coffee maker, thanking my sister for the space, for the time, for the quiet. Before I left, I opened the closet one more time. The dress was still there. I didn't take it with me, but I ran my fingers across the fabric one last time. Back home, everything felt smaller. The kitchen, the air, even the light. Charles was still there, same chair, same silence. He looked up when I came in, not with surprise, just mild acknowledgement. "Good trip?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes." "Quiet." He nodded too, then looked back at his newspaper. A few seconds later, he asked, "You bring anything back?" I thought about that. "No," I said, but I smiled a little. "Nothing you'd notice." The days passed slowly after that. I found myself drifting more often, not out of boredom, but out of something else. A kind of gentle discontent that didn't scream, but hummed underneath. I began walking more, around the neighborhood, past the garden I let overgrow, down by the creek where the kids used to play when they were small. I kept thinking about who I had been, not just with Michael, but even before him. The parts of me I'd buried beneath schedules, beneath marriage, beneath expectation. I wrote letters I didn't send, poems that began in whispers and ended in tears. I started tending the garden again, not for show, not for beauty, but to remember the feeling of something living beneath my hands. And I kept seeing him, in moments, in gestures, in memories. He hadn't changed my life in any dramatic way. He hadn't reached for me. He hadn't crossed a line. But he had reminded me I was still visible. And in doing so, reminded me I was still someone worth being seen. Weeks passed. Summer began to fold into itself. The heat lingered longer at night. The sun dipped earlier. Then, one morning, I received a letter. Just a card, really. Cream paper. My name in ink I recognized. "I saw you. Not just that day, but every day after. You mattered. M. There was no return address. No invitation. Just the message. I held it in my hands like something sacred, not because of what it meant, but because of what it didn't demand. That night, I went to the closet. My own this time. I pulled out a dress I hadn't worn in years. Not silk. Not emerald. But mine. I put it on. Stood before the mirror. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't imagine anyone else looking at me. I looked at myself and saw someone coming back. Reflection is rarely loud. It doesn't arrive in fireworks or fanfare. It arrives in the quiet moments, the space between footsteps, the stillness after a door closes, the breath you take before answering a question no one asked out loud. Michael was never mine to keep, but he was the mirror I needed. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes being seen is the first step to finding your way home.